So welcome, Nancie. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. How are you, Maggie?
I'm great. It's good to have you on the show today. Tell us a little bit about the journey that led you into the work that you are spending your life doing now.
Absolutely. So my background is in mental health and public health, and I had jobs basically that were very social service related. I was at a university for several years doing academic research on depression. I did a lot of depression research, depression community education, suicide prevention trainings, that sort of thing. And it was definitely something that I felt passionately about, yet at the same time, I was getting to a point where it felt very heavy, and I didn't really practice self-care like I should have back then as well, and I got to a point where I was a bit burnt out, and I needed to kind of listen to my inner voice, and there was just this moment where I realized I was kind of also causing some of my own stress and overwhelm, which is kind of when I stumbled upon coaching and this whole concept of human flourishing. And that's when I made the shift. So it's still mental health in a way, yet it's more positive mental health, and helping people to kind of go from, doing okay up to flourishing, rather than, getting over a mental illness or needing treatment, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's different. It's a whole different breed, isn't it? Coaching.
It is. It really is.
And I'm a mindful life coach as well. And my life coaching includes mindfulness and meditation in every session. And I totally understand what you're talking about, because for me, if I have clients that come in that need more than I can provide, because I'm not a therapist, so do you find that too, where you need to refer them out to someone else?
Quite often. Yes. We have an initial conversation, and sometimes I refer them out to a therapist or even a couples counselor. There's all different reasons, and sometimes they need that first in order to move forward with this. I mean, there's all kinds of situations where they might need to experience a good bit of healing first, before actually taking action on whatever it is that they're wanting to move forward with.
So when you got a little burned out in the whole mental health field and discovered coaching, what actually happened? You just got inspired and wanted to share it?
Yeah, it's interesting. At the time I mentioned I worked at a university, and there's this sociologist who studies and researches this whole concept of human flourishing. And I had the opportunity to go see him speak several times. And every time I went to see him, I would be just sitting straight up in my chair, just so excited, just basically what I needed at the time. I would be just taking all kinds of notes. And that was kind of one of the defining moments in my life. There was several of them, but that was one of them, because it just felt really good to me, rather than constantly focusing on the pathology. And again, there's a time and place, of course, for mental health treatment and healing and all of that. It was just felt very refreshing at the time, and then I realized that coaching could tie into it, this whole concept of positive psychology that I was learning about. So I really delved into learning more about that, then went through the coaching certification, of course, got myself in a better place, with my burnout, and then felt like I was in a good place to be able to help other people. That was 10 years ago.
So when you made the shift from being that sort of almost like a therapist in mental health and worrying about pathology to this other side of who you now are and really are passionate about, did you find that shift to be tricky?
It was tricky in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, of course, it felt right. So that's, of course, obviously the direction that I went in. The tricky piece was kind of learning to tune out my colleagues who maybe didn't believe in it, or I had a boss at the time who everything had to be evidence-based this, evidence-based that, and I'm very much still a research person and believe in that. I just love that, I love a lot still about academia, yet it seemed very fluffy to them, of course, coming from environment where I was surrounded by MDs and PhDs, and to them coaching seemed a bit kind of fluffy, if you will. So it was really tricky in the sense that I had to listen again, listen to my gut, to my inner voice, listen to what felt right, and yeah, to kind of share that message.
Because I think that's really important to anyone listening to the Life Illuminated podcast right now, is that oftentimes we know, or we have a sense in our gut or our intuition, that maybe what we're doing isn't really what we're meant to be doing. And maybe there's either a twist like you found to what you loved and then you found passion for, or maybe it's something entirely different. And making that leap to actually pursue it and take the action is sometimes super, super tough for someone who's been, let's say, in their job for 20 years, or just feels like it's never too late to change. But it's that taking that action that exactly. I think is where you are an inspiration, is because you actually paid attention to what was going on in that one class that had you sit upright and get excited again. Right?
You're right. Yeah, I appreciate that. You're absolutely right. I really, it took me a long time, trust me, to get to that point, because there were several moments throughout my life where I didn't listen to my gut, and there would be things that just didn't feel right, but I was really focused on the shoulds. I shouldn't do this, and I would list out all the reasons why I shouldn't, even though it felt right. So there was definitely a lot of conflict that I was causing myself and causing my own stress and overwhelm. Yes, yeah, when I did learn to just stop and make some conscious choices and listen to my gut and my inner voice, and really tap into what felt right. And you're right, taking action is a big part of it. So having courage is certainly a piece of it, because sure, I mean, change can be scary, yet kind of taking steps forward is ultimately what will get you to that place.
What would be the advice that you have? And I'm sure you've had clients like I have who get to that space right there that you're talking about, and then retreat. Like, I can't do it. I'm scared. I won't succeed, or whatever conversations are going on in their head. How do you help coach someone like that? Because I'm almost 100% positive there are people listening to the show today who feel exactly the way you did, and I know you can be of help to them.
I appreciate it. Yes, I know there's a lot of people out there who do get to that point, and it takes practice, right? So if you become more and more mindful of the stories that you tell yourself, that's one step. Right? Because a lot of times we have these negative thought patterns that come up for us, and they just play over and over and over in our minds. And sometimes we can, of course, either take a mindful approach where we observe, and kind of let it go, watch it, float off on a cloud. Or we can reframe and kind of challenge those thoughts, right? So is that really true? But kind of using evidence with that. So for example, the thought that might come up of, can I really do this? Will I be successful? All of those things. If you can challenge that underlying assumption and think about, what is that underlying assumption, that the thought is based on? And then come up with reasons why that's not true. particularly for you, and that's going to be different for everybody. Now, if you're just kind of making stuff up, there's going to be this tennis match in your head of, well, that's not true. Yes, it is. Yet, if you think about, just as an example, let's say somebody wants to do something completely different, even change jobs or fields or whatever it might be, and they're saying, I'm not going to be successful, or, this fear comes up. If the underlying assumption is, I'm not good enough, or I'm not going to be successful, one way to challenge yourself is that, okay, I do really good work right now. I've always done really good work. My bosses like what I do. I get along well with my colleagues, whatever it might be for you. You can come up with reasons why that thought is not true. Now that's just one reason. One way to do this. Yet, another way could be just to come up with an exit strategy and have yourself a plan in place to move forward, yet also being open to possibilities along the way and situations and people that come along the way. But a lot of people feel more comfortable moving forward, having a very specific plan in place, an exit strategy, a transition plan, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? I think we're all pretty well trained to get our to-do lists out and tick things off. And if we tick them off and we do everything that's on the list, things should work out. And what I find is with my clients, and I think this is, and I know this is why I add mindfulness and meditation to my sessions, is I try to take it that next step by having people step back and actually ask themselves, can you just be still for a minute and not do anything and just try to reconnect with your intuitive self and check in and see, is this the right thing? Yeah. And I also think that we oftentimes really define ourselves by the roles that we play, the jobs that we have, the positions that we hold, or our possessions. And I think it's really hard for most, at least for people that I meet, and for me too, for me to step back and say, no, this isn't who I am. This is just what I'm doing in this particular role in this particular moment. And perhaps maybe have the person or me not be so attached to the outcome.
Exactly. Yeah. And not attached to your identity. You're absolutely right. And I like what you were saying in terms of, taking a step back and kind of reflecting on, does this really feel right for me? And sometimes you could feel that in your body. And that's different for everybody. For a lot of people, does this particular thing feel expansive or contract? What am I doing with my body? Or, my shoulders up to my earlobes, that sort of thing. So when I was in those workshops or those classes I was talking about, I would be sitting straight up. So my body was literally, was saying, this feels right. But you're absolutely right, though. It's not our identity. And if we could kind of separate ourselves from that and from the outcome, it takes a little bit of pressure off as well.
Yeah, for sure. Did you bump up against some internal fears and concerns of your own that you had to overcome?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. And that's always a process. That's a continuing, lifelong process for me. And it's something that still I practice, and I still take a step back and have to kind of challenge those underlying assumptions and that sort of thing. Some of the examples of, when I was first leaving my job, I was very excited. I had, workshops lined up. I gave a couple months notice, that sort of thing. Yet that first year, there was definitely, especially the first year, there's, certainly some ups and downs and a lot of getting out of my comfort zone, a lot of networking and getting out there, doing new things. So, that first year, especially, I was certainly having to deal with those thoughts and fears, and for all doing all kinds of new things.
And how did you get past those obstacles?
Yeah. A lot of it was those kind of what I think of as cognitive behavioral, techniques, which is basically, a combination of kind of using my mind and again, kind of challenging the negative kind of thoughts that come up in my head. But also taking those steps, taking baby steps, because ultimately my comfort zone grew, right? Like the first time I did my own workshop was super scary for me. Right. And even before I left my job, I was starting to have to do workshops. And the first time I did one of those workshops, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. And then I ended up loving doing those workshops. Right. So realizing that, that I just can take small steps, to get out of my comfort zone. And then my comfort zone grew. I mean, it really was about taking action, but we probably have all heard, or many of us have heard that term, inspired action. So taking those steps that felt right and determining each next best step that felt right was helpful, despite those thoughts in my head. So it's a classic case of do it scared, yeah.
Well, and I think what's neat too is that, and this is what I talk a lot about in terms of mindfulness and with my clients is, it's the important part is that you notice the habitual behaviors and you notice the automatic responses that you bring to the party all the time. Because most of the time we're so in the doing this that we don't even notice. We're just simply in reaction mode all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So a good bit of it is just is simply self-awareness and just practicing becoming aware of your thoughts and checking in with yourself.
Right, exactly. And who do you think most influenced your life or is one of your biggest role models?
I have to go with that sociologist who I saw speak several times. I've only met him once or twice, so it wasn't a full-on course that I took from him. I just happened to see him speak at various events. His name is Corey Keyes, and I really think that he was there's several people, of course, throughout my life, but he definitely was somebody who influenced me because, again, at the time I was so focused in my job on depression at the time, and it was one of those things, like just like that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. It was really one of those, because I would just soak up the information, and it was just, the timing was amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing when we find that person and we didn't expect it, especially when we don't expect it, right?
Absolutely.
What's the philosophy that you live by, or what guides your life?
Values, I have to say. Getting clear on my values is always important to me. It's always been important to me, even from the very beginning after I graduated college, and I knew I wanted a job helping people. Yet I often check in with myself, on that. And even there's been a couple of jobs I had, even in healthcare, that didn't feel quite right in terms of how things were being done. So I definitely had to check in with myself, and is this still feeling right for me? But really, it goes back to my core values and being true to them and making sure that I'm living authentically in that way.
Mm-hmm. Do you have one piece of advice for anyone listening to Life Illuminated today to help them shift from that place of feeling stuck and disempowered and maybe, taking that action?
Yeah. I think knowing that you're going to be okay, right? That no matter what, you can take baby steps, and ultimately there's an outcome that's going to be positive, right? So if it doesn't work out, it still is perspective, right? That you maybe learned a lot along the way. I speak with a lot of people who tell me, what, if I didn't try this, I would always wonder, I would always regret, that sort of thing. and for folks who want to make a change, it doesn't have to be a huge, overnight overhaul, but perhaps baby steps along the way, and just continuing to check in with yourself to see, again, does this feel right, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, 'cause don't you think fear is one of the biggest things that hinders us?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, that's another way to check in with yourself, I think, is really looking at, is fear driving the bus? What's making the decisions? Is it fear? And it takes practice to determine, is this fear that's holding me back, or is this something that just doesn't feel right? And sometimes we really have to get honest with ourselves and really determine that, because sometimes something doesn't feel right, yet sometimes it's something that feels right. However, we're just so scared that we are remaining stagnant and not taking any steps forward.
Oh,
So
I really appreciate that distinction, because there is a huge distinction between your intuition and fear. And it is super important to be able to get perspective on what is driving the show.
Exactly. So yeah, it takes practice, but awareness is key for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, where can people learn more about you?
Yeah. So
How can people find you?
the best way is to head to my website, and feel free to message me there. My website is nancievito.com. And if you know how to spell my name, then you're golden. So it's NANCIE V like victory, ITO. So it's Nancie with an IE, then VITO.com. And, feel free to sign up. I have a guide if you do feel like you are in that space of, not really knowing if you're on the right path, or kind of thinking about what your intentions are moving forward. I do have kind of a mini workbook that you can download in that regard, and feel free to keep in touch.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you want to share with those of us trying to live a life illuminated?
I would say, continue to trust your gut, and take one step at a time. And yeah, when you do trust your gut, it's amazing. When you follow your intuition, it seems like things just happen to fall into place, when you do trust yourself.
Yeah, sort of organically, right?
It's amazing. Yeah.
If you're really listening and really present,
Yeah.
it's true. It's things they show up easily.
I believe that. There's been so many times where, when I've followed that it just things fall into my lap, and it's amazing.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful advice, and I really appreciate your time. It was great to get to know you a little bit and have you share your strength and experience and hope with our audience. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks. We'll talk soon, I hope.
Absolutely.